Right now, as we speak, there are atrocities and genocides being carried out across the world. In Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Ukraine, in Palestine, and elsewhere. Like much of the world, my eyes have been on Gaza, where Israel continues to carry out its mass ethnic cleansing campaign on the Palestinian population. I've mentioned the need for Palestine's liberation in the past, but this recent escalation seems to have finally triggered a shift in the global consciousness. It is difficult to verify the numbers at this point in time, but certainly more than 83,000 people, mostly women and children, have been killed due to Israel's military violence, imposed mass starvation, and destruction of healthcare capacity in the Gaza Strip, all in broad daylight, live streamed for the whole world to see. There is no Superman to save them. Instead, the extermination continues to be supported by the globe's principal superpower. My eyes bleed at the sight of this injustice. Each of the crises unfolding across the world today is just as worthy of our attention. But I believe that the Gaza genocide in particular has exposed some of the myths of the system of capitalism, statism, and hierarchy for all to see. So that's what I want to talk about today. Earlier this year, I dropped a video ranking just some of the myths of the system, the ideas and beliefs which serve the status quo. Now I want to talk about 4 myths that are being challenged by those serious about resisting genocide and liberating all people. Last time, I ranked the myths on a tier list based on which ones I thought were most impactful, deceptive, and resistant to questioning. The S-tier myths, or less impactful, more commonly questioned, and easier to deconstruct. The D-tier myths. I'll be using the same criteria this time to add to the list I already put together. Before we begin, I want to be clear that I will not abide by any denialism of what is unfolding right now. I have no tolerance for Zionist sentiment, in my comment section or anywhere else. This video does not exist to provide historical context, outline the genocide case, or detail Israel's ongoing actions. If you're unaware and wish to learn more, you can check out these videos and channels. Without further ado, let's get into the myths. First, we have the myth of law. This is the belief that the law is just, impartial, and necessary to keep us safe. But the law doesn't keep us safe. It can't resolve the systemic causes of most criminal behavior, so crime persists no matter how many people are locked up. Nor does it address the systemic violence faced by communities and ecosystems, except to uphold it. And the law isn't neutral either. It exists to defend the status quo of exploitation and oppression by the ruling class. For the poor and powerless, it is ruthless and unforgiving. For the ruling class, it is easily negotiable. Above all else, the law protects the sanctity of their rule and their property, acquired via historical and ongoing conquest. We're expected to externalize our sense of justice to these morally bankrupt authorities. We internalize the belief that if something is illegal, it must be wrong, and if something is legal, it must be just. Politicians, teachers, and media all normalize the idea that justice lives in the law. But our lives prove otherwise. The state of the world proves otherwise. Again and again, the law fails to respond justly to contexts where justice is most needed, while consistently punishing those who do resist injustice. What does this tell you about its true intent? The situation is no different on the global stage, where the law continues to serve the interests of the rich and powerful, arms manufacturers, and imperial powers. The brutal consequences of Israel's ambitions, backed by its fellow settler colonies, exposes the false promise of the rules-based international order for all who cannot already see. What good are human rights laws if they don't meaningfully apply to us all? Whatever high-minded intentions it may appear to have on paper, the law has failed to protect the people of Gaza, far more so than it already fails to protect the rest of us. Yes, the law has changed in the past. Through relentless struggle from below, people have managed to bring the law closer to justice in certain instances. But if anything, that should show us that we don't need the law to tell us what justice is. We don't need the permission of the ruling class to resist injustice by any means necessary. We can reclaim responsibility for ourselves, our communities, and our environments. And it is our duty to stand in solidarity with those trying to do the same. I'd place the myth of law in the A tier. It's deeply embedded in our imagination about how society works, but it's becoming increasingly clear that we'll need to overcome it if we want to pursue justice. The myth of neutrality is the belief that there is virtue and correctness in being moderate. It is the assumption that the truth always lies somewhere in the middle. It is the idea that it is even possible to be neutral under this system. But in a world shaped by exploitation and oppression, claiming to simply seek middle ground is an exercise of profound moral cowardice. Though shades of grey exist, and the truth can be complicated, there are situations which require us to take a clear stand. Compromise simply cannot be found in every situation, and claiming that you don't take sides doesn't mean that you haven't already. To paraphrase South African anti-apartheid Bishop Desmond Tutu, in the struggle between oppressor and oppressed, neutrality is just complicity, especially when it comes to genocide. Mainstream media outlets have made their claimed commitment to truth a joke. Rather than speaking up for the unheard, they have deliberately chosen to use their platforms to favor the interests of the powerful, while downplaying or erasing the perspectives of those suffering most. The myth of neutrality is going in the C tier. I think its credibility is cracking under the weight of undeniable injustice, but there are still those who cling to the illusion of neutrality for the sake of institutional respectability, despite how obviously such neutrality favors the ruling class. Next, the myth of peace is the belief that this system is capable of advancing peace in the world. The idea that even as it suppresses domestic populations and wages endless wars abroad, it does so in the name of advancing peace, freedom, and democracy. But if peace is a state of harmony in the absence of hostility and violence, this system can never achieve it, because it relies on hostility and violence. It requires the expansion of the military-industrial complex, the forcible opening of new markets, the control of strategic regions, and the regimentation of nature and society. The brutality on full display in Gaza is just one particularly blatant example of how this whole system has built and expanded itself, through mass murder and mass theft. The system has been very successful in whitewashing, downplaying, and decontextualizing the long history of violence necessary to establish capitalism and the state. Much of the dirty work necessary to enrich and empower the ruling class was done in the distant past, out of sight and out of mind. The historic mass theft of land and people laid the foundation for a system that no longer needs as much overt violence. After a certain point, systemic inertia takes the reins. The ruling class can keep the resources in their control and keep the people in check most of the time because the laws have been laid down, the lines have been drawn, and the people have been trained to think, work, and live in ways that uphold the system. They don't know any other way, so they no longer pose a threat. But this dirty work is incomplete. The Zionist violence and land grabs taking place in the West Bank, the eviction of communities in the Congo to expand mining projects, and the capitalist expansions into indigenous territory in the Amazon are the continuation of a global history of mass murder and mass theft. The ruling class is waging a war on us all, and they are winning, for now. But their victory is not peace. War is not peace. Stability in the form of control, surveillance, and implicit violence is not peace. And we will never achieve peace until we overcome this system. I'm placing the myth of peace in the B tier. I think people in the global south have always known this myth to be a lie, but despite its systemic backing in the global north, the situation in Palestine has made it much harder for most people to deny. Finally, the myth of ethnosupremacy is the belief that certain ethnic groups are more worthy, valuable, or superior to others, and thus more deserving of land, resources, safety, dignity, or existence. The myth is a byproduct of ethnogenesis, the process by which groups form and come to see themselves as a distinct ethnic group, either due to self-identification or outside identification. While merely identifying oneself with a group is not inherently harmful, the myth of ethnosupremacy has created a world where some people's lives matter while others are disposable, a world where some groups can live in comfort at the expense of others. A world where the abstract and imagined birthright of a group trumps the life and liberty of real people. In the territory that later became Rwanda, colonial powers expanded and solidified pre-colonial social divisions into the distinct and rigid ethnic categories of Hutu and Tutsi, laying the foundation for a genocide that took the lives of approximately 800,000 Tutsis, Twa, and moderate Hutus in 1994. In the settler colonial project of the United States, due to ruling class fears of multi-ethnic collaboration, the distinct groups of European settlers were redefined into a singular whiteness, which offered privilege in exchange for their complicity in a racial hierarchy built on black subjugation. The settler colonial project of Israel was born out of the ideology of Zionism, which falsely claims to represent all Jewish people and act in their collective interest. In reality, Zionism is a political movement built upon ethno-religious supremacy that is used to justify the dispossession and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and an apartheid system that privileges Jewish Israelis over Palestinians. The myth of ethnosupremacy is an all-too-common byproduct of ethnogenesis that has been used to justify conquest, xenophobia, fascism, and genocide. So it's going in the S tier. It's difficult to uproot because it operates at the level of identity and is reinforced by education, religion, media, and the concept of citizenship itself. But until we recognize that there is no hierarchy of human value and that no group is more entitled to land, life, or freedom than another, certain groups will continue to be treated as existential threats to the imagined community called the nation. All of us spawned onto this planet at some point in the last 100 years. All of us have just as much right to enjoy it as anyone else. Borders be damned. People shouldn't have to suffer for the sake of these social constructs. So those are the 4 myths I wanted to highlight in the context of everything happening in the world in general and in Gaza in particular. I believe every myth we bust brings us closer to imagining something new. If you want to see me tackle other myths, check out the previous video and drop suggestions in the comments. Witnessing the devastation in Gaza and beyond is not easy, especially when it feels like there's nothing that we can do. Protest is clearly not enough. BDS puts pressure, but it's also not enough. Donating can help save lives, but it won't stop the genocide. The crackdowns continue and yet the tactics have hardly evolved. We need a social revolution to overturn the status quo and establish a better world. That much is clear. It won't take place in one fell swoop. The odds are against us, the resources are not yet in our favour, our labour power has been made harder to organise, the system has successfully seeded divisions, raised obstacles, and learned from every past uprising. So it may take many years and many pockets of autonomy to eventually break out of its shell. I don't think it's impossible, but it will be very difficult. I wish there was more that I could say, more that I could do, more that I could reach. I don't have many answers, but I want us to push our imaginations forward and shape the world accordingly. That's what this whole channel is about. Learning and exploring as much as possible. For practical ways to oppose and propose for the sake of social revolution, check out my other videos. I hope that you'll join me in reclaiming our future. Until next time, all power to all the people. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow peoples. Thanks to the seedlings, the saplings, and especially the roots for making all of this possible, including our newest members, Sen and Amanda Nichols. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/seeingtrue. Check out my other videos for a range of radical topics. Thanks again. Peace.